All right, so you walk out to your hot tub, ready for a relaxing soak after a long day, and bam, you're hit with that dreaded E02 error message. Talk about a mood killer, right?
It's definitely up there on the list of hot tub frustrations, that's for sure. But, the good news is that we've done a deep dive into this E02 mystery, sifting through articles, blog posts, even some hands-on YouTube tutorials.
Oh, you know I love a good YouTube tutorial. Those visual aids really make a difference.
Absolutely. And what we've discovered is that even though this error can seem like a major headache,
It can be a real head scratcher.
it really can. But the good news is that it almost always boils down to one key thing: water flow. Your hot tub is basically sending you an SOS signal: help, my water isn't moving.
Like a cry for help from the depths of the tub.
Exactly. And the good news is that most of the time, the fix is actually pretty simple.
Okay, so what are the usual suspects then? The things that tend to trip up our hot tubs and cause this EO2 error most often.
Well, the first thing you want to check, and this one might seem obvious, is your filter. Think about it. A dirty filter is like trying to breathe through a clogged mask.
Mm-hmm.
It restricts the water flow so much that the pump can't do its job properly.
Makes total sense. And what I found interesting is that sometimes it's not even that the filter is absolutely filthy, just that it needs a little adjustment. Like
Yep.
one user mentioned that just loosening the filter housing a tiny bit completely solved their EO2 problem.
It's all about that flow, right?
Yeah?
Now, another common culprit that often gets overlooked is the water level itself.
Oh, right.
If the water level dips too low, your pump might not be able to prime properly. And guess what that leads to?
EO2.
You got it.
It's like trying to, I don't know, run a marathon on an empty stomach.
Yeah,
Your body's just not going to cooperate.
exactly. It's just not going to happen. So always double check that water level before you hit the panic button.
Good advice. Yep. Now, let's say you've checked your filter, you've topped off the water, and that pesky EO2 error is still staring you down. What's next on our troubleshooting checklist?
Well, if those easy fixes didn't do the trick, then it's time to roll up our sleeves and do a little deeper investigating. And a good place to start is with the heart of the operation, the pump itself.
The pump. Okay, let's talk about the pump.
Right. So inside the pump, there's this small but mighty component called the impeller.
The impeller. Okay.
It's essentially a small fan that spins and pulls the water through the system. And let me tell you, it is crucial for proper water flow.
We actually found some really helpful visuals in one of the resources we came across, side-by-side photos of a worn-out impeller next to a brand new one. And let me tell you, the difference was shocking.
Oh, I bet. It's amazing how much wear and tear those impellers go through. And over time, all that wear and tear can significantly impact the impeller's efficiency. Sometimes they even break down completely.
And when that happens,
Well, your water flow takes a major hit, and, you guessed it, the dreaded E02 error pops up.
so that sluggish performance you might have noticed lately, even before the error message, that could be a sign to check the impeller.
It could be definitely worth a look.
And, hey, if you end up needing to replace it, we found a fantastic YouTube tutorial that breaks down the process step by step. Who knew replacing a hot tub impeller could be so DIY friendly?
There's a YouTube tutorial for everything these days.
Seriously.
But before you grab your tools and channel your inner handy person, remember, safety first. Always unplug your hot tub before doing any kind of maintenance or tinkering.
Couldn't agree more. Better safe than sorry. Now, speaking of things that can wreak havoc on a hot tub, especially for those of us, let's say, blessed with hard water, we have to address limescale buildup.
Ah, yes, limescale. It's like the silent killer of many a hot tub. If you live in an area with hard water, it can quietly build up in your pump, in your heater, restricting water flow and potentially triggering, yep, you guessed it again, that E02 error.
And it's not just about the error message, right? Limescale buildup can really impact the overall performance and lifespan of your hot tub.
Absolutely, it's like cholesterol for your hot tub.
One expert actually recommended getting ahead of the game by descaling your pump regularly as part of your routine hot tub maintenance. And get this, they even shared a DIY descaling tip using something you probably already have in your pantry white vinegar.
It's true. Vinegar is a miracle worker when it comes to breaking down those stubborn limescale deposits. Just be sure to dilute it properly before using it in your hot tub.
Okay, so we've covered dirty filters, low water levels, and limescale buildup, all potential suspects in the case of the E02 error. But what if none of those seem to be the issue? What happens then?
Well, that's where things get a little more interesting. Sometimes the issue lies with a component that's a bit more mysterious, a bit more elusive. I'm talking about the water flow sensor.
Okay, the water flow sensor. That sounds important, but I'll admit I'm a little fuzzy on what it actually does.
Think of it this way. The water flow sensor is like the nervous system of your hot tub circulation. It's constantly monitoring the water flow and letting the control system know that everything is A-okay.
So how does it actually detect the flow of the water?
Well, it all comes down to a tiny magnetic paddle inside the sensor. As the water flows through, it pushes this paddle upward, triggering a sensor. That sensor then sends a signal to the control system saying, "We're good, water's flowing."
So it's like a tiny little seesaw that gets activated by the water.
Exactly. And as long as that seesaw is moving up and down, the control system is happy.
But if something goes wrong with this sensor,
That's when you might start seeing those error codes popping up.
makes sense. So it's not just about the water flowing. It's about the sensor accurately detecting that flow and communicating it to the rest of the system, like a delicate dance between all these different parts.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is how even the smallest issue, like a damaged sensor paddle, can bring the whole operation to a screeching halt.
You're not kidding. One of the articles mentioned that a rusty or weakened bagnet on that paddle is a common culprit for those frustratingly persistent E02 errors.
Exactly. And luckily, replacing the sensor paddle isn't a terribly complicated fix. We actually found a resource that recommends a handy repair kit that has everything you need to tackle this DIY project.
See, there's a DIY solution for just about everything. It's amazing how many resources are out there for us hot tub owners.
There really are.
But before we move on from this whole water flow sensor saga,
Right.
there's one more thing I wanted to touch on, this whole idea of a stuck paddle.
Yes, the stuck paddle. This can be a bit of a trickster because it can actually trigger either an E01 or an E02 error, depending on, well, when and how the paddle gets stuck.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. So tell me, how does a stuck paddle cause these different error codes?
All right, so picture this. You turn on your hot tub, right? And for whatever reason, the paddle inside the flow sensor is already stuck in the up position. What happens?
Well, if it's stuck in the up position, I'm guessing the sensor thinks there's water flow, even though the pump hasn't even really started working yet.
Exactly. The system gets tricked into thinking the sensor is malfunctioning because it's detecting flow prematurely. And what error code does that usually trigger?
The E01,
You got it. Now, flip the scenario. Imagine the paddle is stuck in the down position. What happens then?
well, if it's stuck down, then the sensor wouldn't be able to detect any water flow, even if the pump is running perfectly fine.
And that, my friend, is how a stuck paddle can also lead to the infamous E02 error.
Talk about a catch-22 of hot tub malfunctions. But at least from what I gathered, a stuck paddle is usually a relatively simple fix.
Absolutely. Often, a gentle tap on the pump is all it takes to dislodge the paddle and get things flowing again.
I love it. A little percussion therapy for the hot tub. But as always, we always want to encourage everyone to, consult their owner's manual for any specific instructions and always err on the side of caution when dealing with any electrical components.
Absolutely. Safety always comes first.
Now, before we go any further down the E02 rabbit hole, I wanted to circle back to our friend Corey from the comments section. His story is a prime example of just how complex and honestly perplexing this error code can be.
Oh, Corey's saga was quite an adventure.
It really was. What I found so intriguing about his experience is that he went through all the usual suspects. He checked the filter, confirmed the water level, even went so far as to test the water flow sensor. But that stubborn E02 error just wouldn't budge.
He was determined to solve the mystery, though.
Oh, absolutely. He was on a mission. He even went above and beyond checking the internal wiring and components of his pump, which, by the way, we strongly advise against unless you're a qualified electrician.
Absolutely. Electricity and water are not a good mix unless you know exactly what you're doing.
Exactly. But, back to Corey and his detective work. After what seems like an eternity of troubleshooting, he finally stumbled upon the root of the problem, a tiny, almost invisible crack in his pump housing.
Talk about a needle in a haystack. Who would have thought such a minuscule crack could cause such a major headache?
Right. And what impressed me most about Corey's story is that he didn't just settle for a quick fix. He saw an opportunity to upgrade his entire system.
That's right. He took that cracked pump as a sign to invest in a more powerful external model, which not only solved his E02 error, but significantly improved his hot tub's flow rate and overall performance. He even managed to integrate it with his existing control system.
Talk about turning lemons into lemonade. Corey's ingenuity is truly inspiring. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to tackle a problem is to think outside the hot tub box.
Absolutely. And speaking of thinking outside the box, there are a few less common culprits behind the E02 error that we should touch on just to make sure we've covered all our bases. So sometimes the problem isn't even with the pump itself, but rather with its lifeline, the inlet and outlet pipes. You know, those hoses that connect your pump to the hot tub?
Right, those guys.
Well, if those hoses get kinked or crushed, it's like trying to drink a smoothie through a straw with a knot in it. Not going to happen.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a good analogy. But how do these pipes even get damaged? Is it something we're doing wrong?
Sometimes it's just wear and tear. Over time, those hoses, well, they can get a little, let's say, flexible.
Flexible.
But one of the articles mentioned something I never would have thought of: low air pressure in the hot tub liner. Apparently, that can actually contribute to those kinks.
Wait, really? How does that even work?
So, imagine this. When the air pressure in your liner drops, it can cause the liner to sag a little bit.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And that sagging, well, it can put pressure on those hoses, sometimes enough to create a kink and restrict the water flow.
So it's like a chain reaction. Low air pressure leads to sagging, which leads to kinks, which leads to
E02.
E02, of course.
Yeah.
So how do you fix it? Just pump up the liner a bit.
Often that's all it takes. But if the hoses themselves are, a little past their prime and have become a bit too flexible, the article I read had a really clever trick: inserting a short piece of rigid pipe inside the hose.
Inside the hose.
Yeah, it helps the hose keep its shape and prevents those pesky kinks.
That is seriously ingenious.
Mm.
And speaking of things that can get clogged and cause flow issues, I remember one source mentioning the ChemConnect dispenser.
Ah, yes, the ChemConnect. Great for keeping your hot tub water sparkling clean, but like any system with moving parts, it can be prone to the occasional clog.
Especially if you're using those larger chlorine tablets.
Exactly. It's always a good idea to double-check that the ChemConnect dispenser is clear and functioning properly, especially if you've already ruled out the other usual suspects for that E02 error.
Right, so it should be on the checklist. While we're on the topic of checking for blockages, we can't forget about the inside of the pump itself, right? Even if the impeller is in good shape, other debris could be hiding in there.
You're absolutely right. It's amazing what can find its way into those internal components: dirt, hair, even small objects like leaves or twigs if your hot tub isn't covered.
Gross. It's like a little ecosystem in there.
Yeah.
So what's the solution? Do we have to dismantle the whole pump to clean it out?
Not necessarily. One of the articles actually suggested a much simpler yet surprisingly effective method: flushing the pump with a garden hose.
Wait, you can just give your hot tub pump a bath with a garden hose?
It sounds too good to be true, right? But it really works. You basically disconnect the hoses from the pump, attach your trusty garden hose to the intake port, and just let the water run through for a few minutes.
And that's it.
The force of the water helps dislodge any stubborn debris clinging to the internal components.
Like a mini car wash for your pump.
Exactly. And it's just another example of how sometimes the simplest solutions can be the most effective.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about checking the hoses, clearing out the ChemConnect dispenser, and giving our pump a good flush with the garden hose. Anything else we might be missing?
You know, there were a couple of other things that came up in our research just to make sure we've covered all our bases. One was the potential for issues with the pump's magnet itself.
The magnet.
Over time, magnets can weaken and in some cases even develop rust.
That makes sense. Magnets seem like they should last forever, but even they aren't immune to wear and tear.
Exactly. And when that magnet inside your pump starts to weaken, it can affect the pump's ability to spin as efficiently. And remember that spinning action is what creates the water flow.
Right.
So even a slightly weaker magnet can reduce the flow rate and potentially trigger, what's coming.
The E02. It always comes back to the E02.
Always. Now, one of the sources we looked at actually suggested a pretty simple test to check your magnet's strength. You just use a small metal object to see how strongly the magnet attracts it. If it seems weak or unresponsive, then it might be time to think about a replacement.
Good to know. It's like checking the batteries in your smoke detector. Better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly. Now, while we've been laser focused on this whole E02 error, it's important to remember that sometimes these error codes can be, well, a little misleading.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Misleading. Are you saying the E02 error could be a red herring?
It's possible. It's like when your car's check engine light comes on and you take it to the mechanic, only to find out it was just a loose gas cap. Sometimes a completely different underlying issue can actually masquerade as an E02 error on your hot tub control panel.
Oh man, tell me about it. It's like when you have a headache and you think you're coming down with something, but it turns out you just forgot to drink water all day.
Exactly. One user in the comments section of an article we found shared their experience with a persistent E02 error. Turns out the real culprit was actually a faulty GFCI outlet.
Ah, the GFCI outlet. The unsung hero of electrical safety, but also a potential source of major headaches.
For sure. So it's always a good idea, before you go down any complicated troubleshooting paths, to eliminate the simple things first, like double check that your outlet is functioning properly and that your hot tub is actually getting power.
Right, check the plug before you assume the appliance is broken. It's such simple advice, but so often overlooked.
Absolutely. And, if you've really gone through all the troubleshooting steps we've talked about and you're still scratching your head over that E02 error, well, then it might be time to call in reinforcements.
Okay, so who do we call when we need backup in the battle against the E02? Give me the hot tub heroes we need.
Well, I'm not sure about superheroes, but calling a qualified electrician is always a good idea when you're dealing with electrical components. Better to be safe than sorry, especially when you're mixing water and electricity.
For sure.
And of course, you can always contact the hot tub manufacturer directly.
Oh, that's a good idea.
They know their products inside and out and might have some troubleshooting tips that are specific to your model. They might even be able to walk you through some repairs over the phone.
Like a virtual helping hand.
Yeah.
So, after this deep dive into the depths of this dreaded E02 error, where does this leave us? What are the key takeaways you hope our listeners will soak up, so to speak?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that while that E02 error can be intimidating, more often than not, it's a symptom of something that's actually pretty easy to fix.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, who knew a loose filter housing could cause such a commotion?
Exactly. And the best part is that so many of these fixes are things you can tackle on your own with a little bit of knowledge and some basic tools.
Absolutely. And as we've learned today, a little preventative maintenance goes a long way in preventing those annoying error messages in the first place.
Couldn't agree more. It's just like with your car, you wouldn't wait for it to break down before checking the oil, right?
Right.
Same goes for your hot tub. Little TLC on a regular basis can save you from a whole lot of hassle down the road.
So true. Well, on that note, I think we've earned ourselves a nice, relaxing soak in the hot tub. Hopefully one without any error codes this time.
Sounds like a plan. And for our listeners out there, as you're enjoying those soothing jets, we'll leave you with one final thought. When was the last time you showed your hot tub a little love?